The Mishnah says as follows. Rabbi Akiva used to say, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Schok v'kalut rosh margilim et ha'adam le'erva. So schok means when a person is joking around. Kalut rosh means when someone is lightheaded. Margilim et ha'adam le'erva. They get a person used to this concept of immorality. All right. Then the Mishnah continues, and we'll kind of describe each thing after we kind of have described the Mishnah. We'll go back and do it. We have one sponsor for Refuah Shlema of Chaya Shafia Shoshana Bat Sarah from Simone Hedaya Hazaku Baruch. Thank you so much. So the Mishnah says, Masoret Sayag La Torah. Tradition is a safety fence for the Torah. So Sayag, if you remember, right in the beginning of Pirkei Avot, we learned this idea called Asu Sayag La Torah. Make a fence for the Torah. So what we're saying over here is Masoret. What is the fence to ensure that Torah does not get warped, doesn't become watered down over time? Tradition applies that pressure. It makes sure that things are kept in the right form. And we'll come back again to what this means exactly in just a minute. Ma'asrot sayag la'osher. Tithing, if a person gives tzedakah 10%, that is sayag, it's a safety fence, la'osher, to wealth. And finally, the Mishnah says, nidarim sayag la'prishut. A vow, when a person promises something, that's a safety fence. La prishut, to abstain from something. And the Mishnah ends with the last one, which is sayag lechochma shtika. The fence for wisdom is shtika, is silence. So we're going to talk about these pillars, if you will, of Rabbi Akiva. These pillars that he indicates that keep a person away, they keep the person honest, they keep the person doing what they're supposed to do. And I want to go through them one at a time. But first, before we do so, it's important for us to understand the idea of sayag. Now, it's interesting to notice he has 4 fences. So that's quite nice. You know, there's 4 fences, north, east, south, west. Got it? There's 4 fences that kind of ensure that a person stays within the lines, if you will. Okay? And we'll talk about how each one works. But first, I want to talk about the general concept. Sayag l'chochma shtika means that, in order to be wise, you want to make sure that you're wise, you may keep your mouth shut. It reminds us all of the famous line that goes, better to keep your mouth shut and let people think you're a fool than to open it and remove all doubt. One of my favorite all-time sayings. I think the root of that saying, of that idea, is rooted in this Mishnah. Siyag l'chochma shtika. Better to keep your mouth shut and let people think you're a fool than to open it and remove all doubt. Okay, wonderful. That's a lovely line. So when we look at this sayag l'chochma, we're having this concept in our brains that's saying to us, I want to make sure that I'm wise, I'm going to keep quiet. And we'll see exactly why that's the case. It makes sure that you stay within the boundaries of that thing. But what's interesting is, when he starts the Mishnah, he doesn't call it a sayag. He says, Sechok v'kalut rosh, when a person is very lightheaded, they're joking around, that can lead a person le'erva, to immorality. And we'll discuss exactly what that means. Why doesn't he say, sayag la'erva, the fence to making sure that you're not getting, towards immorality, is making sure that you take things very seriously, that you're not joking around in all of those, in all of those things. Why doesn't he use that same term? And I want to illustrate the difference between these two concepts. One is sayag. What we're saying is, if a person wants to keep away from something, then they institute this sayag, this boundary. I'll give you an example for this. One of the ideas of a sayag is the concept that the Chachamim instituted with regards to the laws of muktzeh. If you're interacting with an electronic jackhammer on Shabbat, you're walking around with it, you might use it to pound through the cement. If you're allowed to carry your phone and take it with you, so you might just by mistake answer or make a call. The idea of putting it down on some level is a sayag, is a fence. However, what Rabbi Akiva is starting with is saying the opposite, is a fence makes sure that you're staying away. Is it possible that you could stay honest without offense? It is possible. Human nature is that we get too close to the edge when there isn't a fence. So the fence that's there kind of helps us take one step back and make sure that we're safe. As an example, wearing a mask in public, it might not be obligated if you're also socially distanced. But in a situation where people have autoimmune diseases, where they're, elderly or they're not safe, a sayag for that person to stay healthy might be to wear a mask, even in a place where he doesn't have to, because he's taking that extra precaution. And what happens is, if the person's not wearing the mask in a place where they're allowed to not wear it, if they're not going overboard, sometimes what winds up happening is, slowly but surely, those lines get cut back and back. Not because a person's making a conscious decision, which every person's entitled to make, not because they're making a conscious decision about what they should or shouldn't do, but because actually, in the process of things getting, going and moving, we get used to it or we get sick of it. So you wind up actually doing things like in boxing, there's this term, that you could win by a TKO, or you could, or there's a concept of no decision, where there isn't, we're not deciding one way or the other. And sometimes, let's say there's a person can win by no decision, or even the status quo can be maintained by no decision. But that actually might be a win for somebody. If someone was expected to lose and there's no decision, for that person, no decision is a win. Let's say, as an example, you're deciding to punish your child because they've done something truly terrible. They need to learn their lesson. You're trying to waver between making a decision if you should take away their car because they were irresponsible, they did something that was unsafe, or to, make them not go on a vacation with their friends. I'm not giving you examples or ideas, but just imagine you're trying to make a decision between those two things. You're stuck between those two things and you can't decide which one to do. So you know what? The inaction or the inactivity or the lack of decision actually benefits the child who doesn't want to get any punishment. So sometimes when a person hasn't thought something through and made a conscious decision, the decision gets made for them. Just because no decision is also a form of a decision. Okay? So one thing is sayag, where I take distance from something. The second thing is, what makes it likely that you're going to make a mistake? Now, I'm not saying that people are out there, being immoral. But what I am saying is that if there aren't boundaries between people, when human beings are human beings and men are men and women are women, and there are natural drives that exist in human beings, if you're not putting up walls, if you're getting too close to somebody else, what happens? When a person makes the worst mistake of their life, they didn't start off making the terrible mistake. It started off with an excess level of familiarity. You're best friends with someone else who's married. That is not an appropriate relationship, when you're both married. That's just not appropriate. So, schok, kalut rosh, chatting. There's many people, by the way, it's very interesting that they won't even use a person's first name. They even feel that that's a level of closeness that they don't want to go to. So it's Mrs. and Mrs. And that actually used to be, that formal nature used to be something that was baked into society. And it actually helped create barriers and boundaries between people, where you almost were dictating all the time, saying all the time, this, that this person was in a committed relationship, and I need to take a step back. Now, I'm not suggesting that these ideas are something that everybody needs to adopt or adapt, but to recognize that when there are no boundaries that we put in, when we aren't recognizing that human beings always take the path of least resistance, they are motivated by their drives, by what they want, by what makes them feel good. They're motivated, they're pushed by these things. If you don't recognize that that is a fundamental truth about human beings, that when you build a system, that system will be abused. That's just how it is. As an example, you build a system to give people unemployment, which is the most beautiful thing in the world. Know that that system is going to be abused, and there will be people who should be working who won't use it properly. That's just how human beings are. Because the drive for laziness will tell me, why should I get out of bed and work when for the same price as minimum wage, I can actually take an unemployment check. Okay? So if you're not aware of this, if you are living in this fairy tale world, right? In the world of socialism and communism, there's a fairy tale world. It's a lovely idea everyone should share. You know why it's not going to work? Because you're applying it to humans, not to animals. You're not applying it to robots, right? You're applying it to human beings who are driven by greed. They're driven by consumerism. They're driven by comfort. And if you are not willing to recognize that, you're trying to institute a system that simply doesn't work. And it actually blows my mind when I see what's going on today with this, Marxism and socialism, it's being pushed today as very politically correct. It's pushed in universities. You know what? Go out. I always loved this line from Winston Churchill. Churchill used to say, democracy is the worst form of government besides for every other form that has ever been tried. So democracy has all sorts of flaws, but they're not worse than the flaws of monarchy. It's not worse than the flaws of oligarchy. It's not worse than the flaws of communism or of socialism. Go look in the world at countries that are running systems of communism and socialism. Go check if those systems are working. Invariably, they fail, because however lofty and beautiful the ideas are, in the real world, if you're trying to share resources, there's going to be someone who's going to cheat, someone who's going to lie, someone who's going to make a power grab. Look at how that worked out in Russia. Look at how that worked out in China. Look at how that worked out in Venezuela. We're looking at these various countries, and to not see how these things work in the real world is it's delusional, okay? Now, you and I can talk about utopian societies. We could talk about how we wish the world would be, and therefore we can make adjustments within the real world, within our understanding of actual human interaction that mirror the realities that we live with. You can encourage people to give more charity. Judaism has always done that. 10% of your money. It also encourages you not to give more than 20%, because Judaism is first and foremost a realistic system working with human beings, understanding that if you give a guy the opportunity to give out 50%, 70%, 100% of his money, then what will happen ultimately is that guy will become impoverished. The same idea that a person cannot give 10% or more than 20% of their money if they're an average earner. Bill Gates could give 80%. Warren Buffett could give 80%, because there's no chance of that person becoming poor because they have 20% of 50 billion, right? There's more money there than either of these people can ever spend, almost no matter how long they live, okay? So in that situation, of course, it's allowed. But for a normative situation, 10% is obligated, 20% is what a person, can give up to. It's commendable, but not more than that. It's not required, commendable, lovely. On a societal level, those ideas are as important as they are on a personal level. So if there's a concept that a society must give back, there cannot be a capitalist society that does not have a consumerist society that does not have an idea of charity from a perspective of Jewish values. It can't be. If you have to share. But that idea never goes all the way to where communism would want it to be. It never transcends the world of actual reality, because we say after a certain point, you get top heavy and you won't be able to support yourself. And the very system you set up to take care of people who were indigent, who didn't have enough, will actually now then be needed to support you. Societies work that way too. You force them to give above and beyond what they can handle. The society itself becomes top heavy, and then it collapses. If you ask the system to give too much money to unemployment, to give too much money to healthcare, to give too much money to affirmative action. And again, this is not about race, right? To affirmative action, it happens to be something that they set up at the time to help and support black people after, the processes of racism were inherent in American society for a long time. Great. But that's also true for a poor Jewish person and a poor Italian person and a poor Irish guy. They needed help going to college. There were programs there, and that's wonderful. But if the programs, with all the greatest of intentions, they outstrip the possibility of the economy to be able to sustain them, if you are not aware of the fact that raising taxes to such a level is going to cause the richest people, the corporations who had plans to settle in your state or in your country, and then they'll just take their business to another place where they don't have to pay that. Recognize that the people you'll be hurting the most, again, the people you'll be hurting the most is not the rich people. The people you'll be hurting the most is the poor people. There was a fascinating article that came out in England a little while ago where they were talking about how many people Corona would kill, okay? And I found this to be something which actually blew my mind, because it was one of these, when you're reading something and it's just so intelligent and it's so obvious, And even if you don't agree with it, you're like, wow, that is a brilliant point to make. There was someone who was talking about how many people Corona would kill. And it was mentioning this idea with regards, again, specifically with regards to quarantine. Now, everyone in the world understands that it's obvious that you need to quarantine in order to flatten the curve. That is something that every single person agrees with, and if they don't agree with, I think that they're crazy. We know that that helps. Who you're quarantining, how far you have to go in the quarantine, that's a question that people need to figure out for themselves, with medical advice, granted. But this article came out where the scientists and the doctors were talking in England about the cost of shutting down the economy. Not to the economy, because everyone started yelling immediately. Who cares about the economy? People are dying. Making it so simplistic that it's so obvious that, you have to yell at the guy who wants the economy to be open. Why? Because he's a monster. He's putting the money in front of human lives. But that's not how it works in England. In England, the national health system, they don't have privatized insurance like we have here to the same degree. Over there, the country predominantly works on a health system that's built by the country, funded by tax dollars. So these doctors were saying, you shut down the economy, you save the victims of Corona, but you are condemning all the victims that the health that the health system will be unable to support in the future. So a guy who has a heart attack is now not going to survive because they don't have the ability to perform the life-saving surgery that they need. It's too expensive. A person who has a brain tumor is going to die. A person who has, complications in pneumonia is going to die. So how do you weigh up? It's not money versus death. It's death versus death. But death versus this popular thing that everyone's talking about called Corona versus death of every other problem that people could die of. Now, again, people love to shout sound bites. People love to shout slogans. But if you're an intelligent human being, hang in the conversation and talk about this to the point where you're actually admitting. Now, you can argue at the end, but did you hear it? Did you at least hear what was said, what was communicated? Let's come back to this idea. If a person is aware of human nature and they are not willing to build in safeguards, then people will cross the line. You know why? Because it comes to a point where you're so close to the line, you can't help yourself from falling over. You're at the edge of the roof and then the wind comes. And even though you didn't intend on overstepping, you wind up overstepping. Okay? Let me add one stage beyond this, all right? And I just think this is such an obvious thing, but it's so interesting how things that are obvious to us, when you talk about them amongst people, and it's not something that they want to do, they're willing to kind of engage and listen to, but the minute it actually applies to something that they feel strongly about, then it's not that they disagree, they're just not willing to hear, they're not willing to listen, they're not willing to have any sort of a conversation. And I want to kind of take this to its natural conclusion, if that's okay, together over here. One challenge is if you're so close to the edge, even circumstances beyond your control might push you to a place where you didn't want to go. But there's another problem. And the problem is, it's very difficult to see the line when you're standing on it. As a society, as the walls have crumbled, as everyone, again, it's such a personal pet peeve, but I think it's important for people to hear. Like, there was once a time where if you were looking at somebody else, you were looking at someone else's wife, not dressed appropriately, like they would arrest you for being a peeping Tom. If you looked at someone's children in their bathing suits at the pool, like you'd be a person that would be sentenced to years in prison. And now all of those pictures are on public profiles on Instagram. It's an interesting thing. The concept of privacy has just been eliminated. And I'm not even talking anymore necessarily about modesty. Like, your person might feel like invaded if they were, in their backyard and some random person was looking over the hedge. Well, the system of Instagram and Facebook is a system of millions and in some case billions of people looking over the hedge. So hopefully, and I know a lot of people actually have gotten smart enough on their own accounts, but even more importantly, if your children are on social accounts, make sure that their accounts are on private. Our world is an insane world, and no, you are not being a paranoid parent if you are setting rules and guidelines for safe usage for your children online. Now, you might want to be that cool parent that has no rules and no guidelines, but don't come talk to me later on, God forbid, when some crazy, absolute maniac nutcase interacted with your child online and then is trying to lure them somewhere. This is how the world works today. It is just the nature of our world. If you're not aware of that, you're not being paranoid for not being aware of that. You're being silly. Now again, don't go crazy, don't be nuts, but make sure that your kids understand, the situation that you're in. Like, would you be parading yourself around in a bathing suit in front of a bunch of strangers somewhere? So be cognizant of that. At least make your decisions with your eyes wide open. That's what the Mishnah is teaching you over here. There are boundaries. And if you are unable to see boundaries, or you don't think boundaries are important, then you're not living in the real world. Closeness, inappropriate closeness with someone who is otherwise engaged, so to speak, is a problem. Yes, that is a problem. And when we find out about these horrific stories, remember, they didn't start horrific. They started innocently. But they started innocently without boundaries. Can something stay innocent? Absolutely. If you have your eye on where the line is. If you're standing on the line, you can't see the line. Okay? So that's the first thing that it's talking about over here. Schok v'kalut rosh, margilin et ha'adam le'erva. In a world today when everyone is obsessed with being, online and texting and WhatsApping, it is so important for husbands and wives, for families to be able to create a universe which is only for them. Just family news that nobody needs to know. Interaction. And by the way, family jokes, family stories, building a unit which builds trust between husband and wife, parents and children, etc., etc. Things that are held over here that are inappropriate to go out. Not because they're nasty, they're dirty, they're sinful, just because the concept of privacy and having and building a safe space for your family that only your family is in. That's how you build healthy family units. If you don't have that, and your child or your husband, whoever, needs to come home and share news with you that they cannot imagine getting out beyond the family unit, what do you think happens if you did not create that unit in advance? So as an example, if your husband knows that he comes home and tells you that he lost his job, he knows that your sister and your cousin and your best friends and your mother and his mother-in-law, and everyone's going to find that instantaneously because he shared that news with you. Don't you realize that you're encouraging him not to be honest and forthright with you? I'm not saying he should lie. I'm saying, don't you think he's going to withhold information? Of course he's going to. Not because he wants to. And it's not your fault. But if you did not create these fences, this space, then he's not going to come to you. If your child is embarrassed about something that they did, they stole something from the grocery store. They know that there isn't a safe space to come to. You're going to get on the phone and say, you don't know what your grandson did. You don't know. The minute they understand that these boundaries are broken, the family boundaries, the marital boundaries are broken, suddenly the ability to be able to deal with things in-house disappears into thin smoke. And then that's when you have the biggest problems. I read this line the other day, which I thought was brilliant. It was talking about when a person facing their problems. And it was a magnificent line. It said, it was in an article on this blowback that we're now, Baruch Hashem, seeing a little bit more of with regards to Jewish privilege, where everybody needs to kind of understand what's going on around us in the world and how the conversation has shifted now from white privilege to Jewish privilege. Ironically, somehow racial hatred and racial intolerance and racial injustice, even if it doesn't start with the Jews, it always involves the Jews. Always. And now you have, as an example, Black Lives Matter people who are pushing this narrative. It's scary that this is how did we get involved in this? Why is Deshaun Jackson, retweeting Louis Farrakhan, who is a hate preacher, who talks about wiping out the Jews, who idolizes Hitler? It's amazing because these conversations, we have to be in the real world. It would be wonderful to be idealistic and blind and think that actually these conversations could exist in a vacuum and not actually turn round somehow, boomerang back on us. But they always boomerang back on us. It doesn't mean we don't engage in them. It doesn't mean we don't do what's right, but we do what's right, recognizing that somehow we wind up being the victim almost 100% of the time and not playing victim. Okay, this is very important to be aware of right now, to keep your eyes open and seeing how these trends are going. The BBC, which is no friend, by the way, of Israel and the Jewish people, go back and see their biased reporting, has actually now forbidden their members from wearing anything from Black Lives Matter, not because the idea of the cause is not something that they stand behind, but because the actual movement itself, that movement itself, go on their website. You'll see that they've linked up with anti-Israel sentiment and Free Palestine. Like, they've kind of created a narrative that fits the way that they would like social justice to be talked about. And anyone who actually stands up against that is now branded a racist and a bigot. It's very important. Have your eyes open when you're engaging in these conversations, okay? Now, what's magnificent to me in the Mishnah is that the Mishnah is telling us, do this, it's gonna go there. Just be aware that that's where this goes. Okay, the joking and lightheadedness. It goes, now I have to share, the word erva over here literally means immorality, but the truth is, I think this refers to all desire. Okay, all desire is like this. If a person has any sort of addiction, that's where desire kind of links up with, it connects to, yeah? It gets to a point where a person's desires, they force a person down a path that they don't even want to go down. We're going to have the Mishnah, which talks about kinah, ta'ava, v'kavod, motzi'in et ha'adam min ha'olam, where jealousy, honor, and desire remove a person from this world. And we'll see exactly what that means when we get there. But the idea that a person's desires take them out of the world on one level means that they lose focus of reality. They lose any ideas of proportion. So as an example, the guy might have a happy marriage, and then what happens? He's thinking about all this other stuff, and for 5 minutes, he ruins his marriage. A person might have an amazing, position in business, and because at the table, they're like asking him, oh, what's going on with the business? He's happy to spill the beans for 2 minutes of kavod. He'll talk about his boss, and he'll talk about their IPO, and damage the business irreparably. For what? For 2 minutes of the boys kind of feeling like he's a good guy because he shared the gossip about his business, and he shared its flaws, and he could tank his business, even a business that he built up, or he had a part in building up, because it feels like everyone's bashing the rabbi, everyone's bashing that guy, so you know what, let me give them the inside scoop. It feels great to be part of the gang, and for 10 seconds of that feeling of belonging, they literally throw away their business, their success, even if they have sometimes equity in the company. I see this so many times with people. So this idea is true about all desire. If you have a lightheaded approach, what's going to happen to the guy, the alcoholic, who's gone away, safe helped him go away, they've gone to rehab, they come back, they need to understand, this is a very serious commitment. Because if you're an addict once, they say you're an addict for life. If you don't recognize that one glass of wine is enough to knock you off the wagon, your chances of successfully getting past this addiction are next to zero. You don't have people who are heavy addicts develop a healthy and balanced relationship with their addiction later. It just doesn't happen. Partially because addictions are they're part of the way the brain structure changes. It's not just that I like the taste of whiskey. I like the taste, I like the way, cocaine makes me feel. Eventually there comes a point where coke or alcohol or gambling, it's not just that I like the feeling now in an extemporaneous way. It's built its way into the way my brain operates and what my brain craves. So that's very difficult to change. Says the Mishnah, understand, there are certain desires that are almost universal. The desire for intimacy it's a universal desire. The desire for for honor, it's universal. If you don't take this seriously, if you have a lackadaisical approach to understanding its pull, its clarion call, like the sirens of old, they will sing their song, suck you in, and your boat will smash to smithereens on the shores of desire. Okay? That's the first idea of Rabbi Akiva. The second idea of Rabbi Akiva is Masoret Sayag La Torah. And this is incredibly important. And we've spoken about this in different iterations over the classes that we've had for the last however long. And that is as follows. You know, Torah is a magnificent thing. It has wonderful laws, guidance for living. It's the most incredible document. It's what's helped the Jewish people achieve their level of growth and success all throughout the ages. It's not a racial thing. It's not a genetic thing that we happen to have that's made us powerful, smart, etc., disproportionately influential in the world. It's not because of a race, and the proof of that is that the Jewish people are actually made up of mixed races. Go find yourself a very dark-looking, Ethiopian Jew, sit him next to a mildly dark-looking, Middle Eastern Jew or Mediterranean Jew, with their olive skin, to the white-skinned, Ashkenaz European Jew. We come from all different places. So what is the secret of this success? What's the secret sauce? And I must say, the secret sauce to me is actually very simple. And I actually allow myself to gain perspective on this, not from my own wisdom, but from others' wisdom. And let me share where I know this idea from. The first place where we see this is from the Torah. In the Torah, you see this magnificent concept where the pasuk says, "Ki hi chochmatchem ubinatchem le'enei hagoyim." The Torah is your wisdom, is your cleverness, as understood by the nations. They get that the mitzvot that you have, that the Torah that you have that guides you, that is your guiding light, they get that this is what makes you successful. And one of the things that I've always thought is that if you take a look at, at Christianity, which today is the largest religion in the world, Islam is now kind of catching up, but Christianity with all of its branches is the largest religion in the world. And what's amazing is that when they started this religion, what did they do? They effectively piggybacked on Judaism. So why did they do that? Why didn't the early adopters, why did the early formers of Christianity, why did they make their own religion? Why did they need to have an Old Testament? It kind of makes it sound a little bit fishy. Like the Old Testament says, oh, the Jews, and then the New Testament's like, yeah, okay, so the Jews, that was last book, that was the earlier series. Season 2 is now the Christians' turn. Why did they do that? Why did they make themselves, the heroes of the book? Why do they need that? And one element of that is because they couldn't match the claim of national revelation. So this idea that the Jews have, where Torah was given to everybody and everybody saw it, there's only one nation on earth that claims, one religion on earth that claims that the godly, the divine revelation happened to all of the people. Because you can't make up that claim, because everyone then contradicts it. You can say that some of us saw it, or I saw it, and people could choose to believe you or not, but you cannot say that all of their parents and grandparents and everyone, they saw it and they handed it down from generation, because someone would have told you, actually, it was a lie. I was there, there was no God. It was Moshe who came down by himself and told us what he saw on the top of the mountain. Okay? So one idea that they took it for is because of the divine revelation, that they couldn't match that claim. So it's easier to just say, that happened. And now, there's this little deviance where God then appeared to this guy and told him, okay, yeah, I liked them before, but now I have a new girlfriend. You know what I mean? So that was easier to do. But there's a second idea. Ki hi chochmatchem ubinatchem le'enei hagoyim. This is your wisdom. This is your superpower. So the nations of the world understood that. And if they could adopt that wisdom, that brilliance, that morality into their new system, then they hoped that would give them a sense of the achievement, of the guidance, of the focus that the Jewish people had or have had all throughout the ages. What's interesting to note is even today in South Korea, there's this amazing thing. You can Google it and find out. There are groups of non-Jewish South Koreans who have no intention of converting, who are sitting and studying Talmud all the time. Now, there's lots of Jews who don't study the Talmud or the Gemara. It's a very difficult study. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of thought. It's complicated arguments back and forth. It's the most amazing thing ever. But, a vast majority of the Jewish people don't study Talmud. Who's studying Talmud besides the Jews? South Koreans. Why? Go see it. You'll find the interview online. It's unbelievable. They said there's something the Jews have, and we finally figured out what it was that the Jews had that made them clever, that gave them this drive, that gave them this clarity. And we figured it's the Talmud, so they started studying the Talmud in South Korea. Remarkable that. So number one, I can look and see that the Torah gives me incredible wisdom, not just because of me, not just because I think that way or you think that way, but number one, because the Torah says it, and number two, because you're seeing the nations of the world do that. On a negative side, we understand that the most burned book in the history of the world is the Jewish books. Why were they obsessed? Why were the Nazis obsessed with burning our books? Why? And by the way, that's actually happening today. There's a post you should see online of a teacher in a Jewish school where they firebombed the Jewish library. And they wrote a note and they said, first we burn your books, then we burn your children. Let's talk about Jewish privilege, okay? They're talking about wiping us out again as a nation, all right? It's a ludicrous thing, this idea. Now, but let's move on. Why are they burning our books? Why 24 wagon loads right in front of Notre Dame, by the way? Why? Why are they burning all these? Because they understood that Torah is what gives the Jewish people its unbelievable edge all throughout history. That comes from the Torah. What's the problem? Says the Mishnah, Masoret sayag la Torah. Traditions, they keep Torah, I don't want to say relevant. Torah itself is always relevant, but humanly relevant. So as an example, the idea of everyone getting together at the Pesach table has kept Pesach Seder a part of the Jewish conversation for thousands of years. And I want to be clear about this. What would happen if you were a religious family and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, you couldn't go to your in-laws? You couldn't go to the grandpa who led the Seder. You did it yourself. There's no mitzvah that the Pesach Seder needs to be done with wider family. There's no such law. Right? The Pesach lamb needs to be done with the people of that household. But that families, cousins should get together by the grandpa's house doesn't exist. And by the way, we learned that this year. In Corona, all of a sudden it was like, how could we have a Pesach Seder if it's not at the grandparents'? Pesach Seder doesn't need to be at the grandparents'. However, Masoret, tradition, is a safety fence to the Torah. Because there's lots of people who, just because the Torah said to have a Pesach Seder, are not going to do it. What made it, locked it in to the Jewish vocabulary and vernacular? One word. Tradition, tradition, tradition. Yam baba baibam, ya baba baibam, ya baba baibai, ya baba baba. That tradition locked in Pesach Seder. People who keep nothing are going to shul on Rosh Hashanah, blowing a shofar, dipping the apple in the honey, because we have a song that goes, dip the apple in the honey. That's it. That's what we've got. If someone had instead made a song, dip the challah in the salt, make hamotzi loud and clear, we'd be a nation of challah eaters even more than we are. And we as Jews would have a problem with obesity. Either way, the point is that we are now in a situation where people are falling away from the Torah itself if they're choosing to live more secular lives, but actually they kind of feel really nice about tradition. And that Masoret, actually, even when the bonds and the binds of Torah are a little bit weaker, they keep people in line. Communities sometimes can choose to institute or to build traditions that create beautiful adherence to Torah guidelines. So as an example, the idea of giving 10% to charity is something that is between you and Hashem. You and God have to work that out. Your obligation to help and sustain the poor. That's between you and Hashem. But in the Syrian community, it's a huge thing that when you go up to the Torah, you donate money. Why did we take that private relationship of giving charity away from the sense, from the domain of the private and put it in the domain of the public? You know why? Because creating that public tradition has actually instituted within young children already from a young age this idea that you've got to give money to charity. There is no such thing as you keeping all of your money. It's not only yours. Okay? So those concepts, sometimes these traditions actually are incredible. And you have people who don't understand the wisdom and the value of traditions. So they'll mock it, or they'll they'll knock it, or they'll say, you know what, I don't want to say how much money I'm giving. I'm just going to say that I'm going to give matanat yado, a gift of my hand. And when people ask why are they doing that, they'll say, oh, I don't feel that people should be giving publicly. I feel it's more humble to give privately. Absolutely. But who gave you the right to decide that your humility is more important than another poor person having food on his or her table? Don't make light of traditions. A lot of times, your thoughts are not encompassing the wider understanding of that tradition. Rabbi, why? I know the spirit of Shabbat. Yes, the spirit of Shabbat. Number one, there's a law in halacha called the spirit of Shabbat. Okay? But beyond that, if the Torah was instituting this thing which would allow you to be in the zone on Shabbat, understanding yourself, your relationship with Hashem, your relationship with your children, your ability to accept yourself as you were without any intentions of changing yourself or your reality, loving your life. That's Shabbat, loving your life. If you're gonna just find all the things that you're allowed to do on Shabbat, halachically, but might not be in the spirit of Shabbat, and just bring them in, what winds up happening is this beautiful thing that was nurtured and guarded and built all throughout the ages is going to be shot to pieces without you even realizing. That's the idea of Masoret Sayag la Torah. Understanding that I could read the Torah and I could figure out what I think the Torah means. But you know what? There are people who know more about the Torah than you. And yes, that is your interpretation. And in our world today, a world of subjective truths where everyone gets to decide how they are and who they identify as. And you could be a chair if you'd like. That's the law. You could decide anything whatsoever, right? And I'm allowed to decide for myself if I'm going to give charity. I'm allowed to decide for myself, how I file. I'm allowed to decide for myself if I'd like to be married or civilly married. And for many couples, the decision as to what they are or aren't is driven by a tax credit. If that's not insanity, I don't know what is. That the greatest relationship that a human being could possibly have would be dictated by how much money he could take home at the end of the month. Unbelievable. However, let's focus on this one point for 1 second. This concept of Masoret means that the Torah is a tradition that was handed down from expert to expert, from expert to expert. Now, yes, you as a father need to teach your kid. You as a mother need to teach your kid. But when you don't know or when you're unsure, going to someone who is an expert in it is incredibly important. Having a rabbi weigh in. Now, people will say, oh, these rabbis are just making stuff up. Let's say they're making stuff up. Let's say for a second. They're not, but let's say they are. Don't you think that they have a more likely ability to discern what the Torah means because of their exposure to it than you might have with much less learning of said material? There are times when doctors don't know. Corona taught us that tremendously. But since the doctors have shown us that they don't know, so now what? We're not going to listen to any doctors on this? Even if a doctor says, I don't know, because we don't have enough information, his educated guess, based on the fact that he spent his whole life in the medical profession, is incredibly valuable to saying to me and to you that I don't know, but this is what my feeling is. In our synagogue, people ask me all the time, how do you know when you should open, when you shouldn't open? Isn't it a big decision for you to make as a rabbi? And you know what I said? I said, actually, I'm not worried about my decision at all. You know why? Because we've taken medical guidance on every single step that we've done. There's been one doctor. I've not listened to the noise. I've not listened to WhatsApp. I've not listened to letters that come out. I have one doctor who actually happens to work next door to the synagogue. His name is Matthew Dunell, a wonderful young man. All right? And here he is giving us the most incredible guidance. He's an epidemiologist. He's a public health official. This is his job. He is not a pediatrician. Okay? He's not some random guy. His job is in understanding the way epidemics move through communities. He was born to serve for this problem. He'll tell me, I don't know, because nobody knows. And that actually is reassuring to me, because when a doctor will admit that he doesn't know, that tells me he's being honest with me. And he's saying, I don't know, but this is my best advice, based on all of my years of experience in following other epidemics, in understanding, reading and understanding the Spanish flu, and reading and understanding SARS, and reading and understanding MERS. All these things coalesces into my advice on this situation. And yes, then you should open your ears and listen to that person and follow the directives 100%. Don't follow your TV. Don't follow a random WhatsApp message. And then messages come out, and it turns out that actually the thing that they said wasn't true, and it was a false positive, or the thing that they said wasn't true, and actually initially transmission happens like this, or it happens like that, or you should wear a mask, or you shouldn't. Follow your medical doctor. Not your uncle, not your cousin, not the guy who sent you a message, okay? Masoret sayag la Torah. When something is handed down by the experts, by the ones that know it best, they have the best ability at discerning what the Torah is communicating. The second of the four fences of Rabbi Akiva is ma'asrot sayag la'osher. And I always found this part of the Mishnah fascinating, because masoret sayag la Torah, the masoret is the Torah. I get that. The tradition tells you about the laws of the Torah. Nidarim sayag la prishut. Later on we're going to see. When you make a vow, that's a safety fence for abstinence. We'll come back again to what that means. But the vow actually is the abstinence. Ma'asrot sayag la osher is kind of like you could almost supplant the word sayag, which means fence, for the word sigula, which means is like a good omen for, or is generative of, but it's a spiritually superficial connection. In other words, God says, vinatenu. The word vinatenu in the Torah is 5 letters, vav, nun, taf, nun, vav. It's a palindrome. And you will give. It's talking about giving charity. It's first used in the context of giving charity to the Mishkan, to the synagogues, to the temples, to the Bet HaMikdash. Vinatenu. And our rabbis tell us, if you follow that word, palindromically, you'll see that vinatenu, as you give, you receive. In fact, that idea is described in the Gemara. The Gemara says, aser ta'aser, we read it on the holiday, aser ta'aser, which means tithe you shall surely tithe, give a tenth you shall surely give a tenth. It uses double expression, which is unnecessary, and the Gemara it says at Derasha, aser, not aser ta'aser, but rather aser ta'asher. Aser, give a tenth of your money, bishvil shetit asher, in order that you should become wealthy. This Mishnah is locking that dirasha into Mishnaic tradition and saying that if a person gives 10%, that is a safety fence to your wealth. The Talmud actually gives a fascinating example in the Masechet Gitin. It talks about the idea of a sheep. You have two sheep swimming across a raging river, trying to get away from a wolf. Okay? They need to swim across. One sheep drowns and one sheep survives. And what's the difference? Says the Talmud, the sheep that had recently been shorn of its wool. As it swam through the water, the wool was only able to absorb so much. It was short. It manages to swim through. But actually, the sheep that hadn't been shorn with the big fat wool coat absorbs so much water that actually its wool causes it to drown. We are noticing that now in Corona times as well, and in all times of financial crisis. Sometimes it is actually a person's wealth that makes them poor. They are over-leveraged on their real estate, and suddenly the fact that they had so much makes it unmanageable for them to be able to be paying rent or to be able to be dipping into their own personal pots to get out of it. So you have a guy who's got 100 million who could go down to zero because he had so much, and a guy who's got 5 million who can actually maintain himself because he's got enough in savings to be able to pay off the mortgages while other people are not paying off those mortgages. I give a beracha to everyone that they should have tremendous hatzlacha in their parnasa now. I don't want to trigger anyone in this class, okay? But however, tithing is a safety fence to wealth. You want to ensure that your wealth stays with you, says the Mishnah. Give money to charity. Shear some of that wool off. Shear and share your wealth, and then you'll ensure that you actually get it back to you too. Nidarim sayag la prishut. I just want to say one more thing. Someone said to me, Rabbi, it's a very difficult time. I can't afford to give charity now. I said, if it's a very difficult time, my dear sir, you can't afford to not give charity now. Right? You hear me? Yeah? The Mishnah continues and says, Nidarim sayag la prishut. Vows are an abstinence for prishut. Interestingly enough, again, aside from the Torah being a guide on this, we also have this idea from within the world of addiction. One of the things that they'll tell every addict is that they must specifically articulate what their goals are going to be and say, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to achieve. And not only do they say that out loud, they actually have to say it out loud in front of a group of people, or they have to say it out loud to a sponsor. Sharing that to someone else, to another person in your world, actually is enough to be able to make the likelihood of you achieving it skyrocket. So just articulating, I am going to do this, is enough for me. Why? Because when something is a thought, it lives in my internal world. The very fact that I've said it out of my mouth means that now this exists outside in the wider world. If I tell all my friends that I'm going to lose 5 pounds and I don't lose 5 pounds, I'm a little bit embarrassed that I didn't follow through. So actually, it was the saying, the dedication, the neder, if you will, of losing that weight that's motivating me to get the job done now. If I just think in my brain, I want to lose 5 pounds, that's amazing until there's cake, right? Cake trumps internal voice. But cake doesn't trump external shame. You've now said in front of everyone you're going to lose 5 pounds, and now all your friends are seeing you, smashing down that cake, and they're like, what's with the 5 pounds, dude? They guide you. They guard you because of your neder. So when a person makes a neder, that actually takes them somewhere. Now, I can hear some of you thinking online. I can hear some of you thinking on Instagram, Facebook, on Zoom. I can hear on Torah Anytime. I hear them differently in my ears, right? I can hear you guys thinking. You guys are thinking, well, that sounds crazy, Rabbi, because actually, don't we have this whole thing called Hatarat Nedarim, where we undo all of our oaths, our swearing, our promises? We have that exists in our world. So why in the world is this a thing? Why are you saying that this is a thing that helps people? It can't be that it helps people if we're undoing it. Clearly that's not a good thing. We're trying to get rid of them. Kal nidre. Take a look actually in the book and you'll notice something very interesting. You'll notice that the expression, the pages that talk about neder, they actually say, I'm getting rid of all my nidarim, except for nidrei mitzvah, except for the positive things that I said I was going to do. So those nidarim, those promises, those swearings, where you swore to pray with a minyan once a week, or you swore to try and keep Shabbat better, or you swore you're only going to eat kosher meat, or you're only going to eat kosher out, or you're only going to have, etc., etc. You're going to have a guest, for your Shabbat table once a month, whatever it is. That thing that you've said out loud, Hatarat Nedarim, is not supposed to undo. Now, if you can't manage it, so then you can go and ask to undo that specifically. But that's not what Hatarat Nedarim is for. In fact, we go to pains to explicitly exclude those Nedarim from what we've said. In fact, it's a pasuk. The Mishnah in Nedarim says, it quotes the pasuk from David HaMelech, which says, Nishbati v'akayema Lishmor mishpitei tzidkecha, which means Nishbati v'akayema. I've sworn v'akayema, and I'm going to keep my word. Lishmor mishpitei tzidkecha, to keep the statutes, the just statutes that you've commanded us to keep. So we find it specifically, that's called nidrei mitzvah. So if a person is inspired by a class, by an event in their life, take that on the spot and say, I am going to do X. Don't choose X squared. Don't choose something that you can't do. Choose something that is within your realm of possible that you could actually achieve. And then when you say it, that's a fantastic thing. Frida is asking, is it okay to promise to accept Shabbat longer than not do it anymore? Excellent question. Now, if you're making a neder to do something, your example is to keep Shabbat. Another example might be to eat only Chalab Yisrael. Another example might be, depending on everybody's level, wherever they are on the ladder. If I say I'm going to do it for a limited amount of time, I'm going to do it this week. You've only promised that week. If you say you're going to do it forever, then then you've promised to do it forever. If you can't do it anymore, then you have to get that neder, that vow, undone. And you can do hatarat nedarim specifically for that neder, for that promise. However, there's also another idea, Frida, which says that if I do something 3 times in a row, so if 3 times in a row, I keep Shabbat, like specifically, not like I was sleeping, but I keep it until the later time, or I, accept Shabbat in earlier, 3 times specifically on purpose, and I don't say Bili Neder, then the 3 times locks it in as if I said it. Okay? So in that situation, a person would need to then do Hatarat Nedarim if they've done it 3 times. So if you're going to take on a practice, you don't know if you could keep it, it's too much to take on, then you could just say the words Bili Neder. But Nedarim, those words, they help us abstain from the things that we don't want to do and help us abstain from not doing the things that we do want to. And finally, the last one is Sayag lechokhmah shtika. The wisdom, the safety fence for wisdom is keeping your mouth shut. I don't want to focus on this now because we have another Mishnah where we're going to talk more specifically about silence in general, the golden nature of silence, but I will say this. There's a great line that goes, if you are talking, you are not learning anything new. Because whatever's coming out of your mouth, you already know. If you are talking, you're not learning anything new. So the ability to listen is incredibly and inextricably linked with acquiring wisdom. What happened when Shlomo HaMelech asks God to be the wisest of all men? What did God give him? Lev Shomeya, a heart which listens. You want to be wise? You have to listen double as much as you speak, which is why God made 2 ears and 1 mouth, to teach us the proportion of listening to speaking. Okay? The second thing is as well, oftentimes, a person from their own perspective, they think they understand something. If you're not willing to be quiet enough to hear how someone else sees a situation, how someone else understands something, you will never learn. And we've already learned that what does Pirkei Abot think is the cornerstone of wisdom? We've already expressed this. In wisdom we say, Ezehu chacham, who is wise, halomed mikol adam, he who learns from all men. If you're not quiet enough to learn from all men, how could you be a chacham? So these 4 things, making sure I'm giving my 10%, understanding that I need to be a giving person. Again, let's not get caught up in the terminologies here, but understanding that is 1 fence in my life. My giving. How do I give? What are my boundaries in giving versus taking? The second boundaries, Masoret Sayag LeTorah. What are my traditions? How do I build my home? What's allowed in my home and not allowed in my home? How will I allow my children to go out dressed or, to go to eat, or who will I allow them to? What are my guidelines? These are my red lines. I have to have some. Masoret, my tradition. The third fence is Nedarim. What am I telling people that I stand for? What am I telling people I'm going to achieve? What are my stated mission statements in life? And finally, the last one is Sayag lechokhmah shtika, is when is my time and how am I listening in my day? Am I listening enough? Am I hearing my wife? Am I hearing my children? Am I hearing my congregation? Am I hearing my boss? Or am I hearing my employee? A lot of bosses think that they know the business better than all employees, and that is true. But what they don't know is that on the floor, they're not realizing that the trend may have shifted. And although what he learned is X, the guy who's selling the damn cameras, he's telling you nobody is buying this camera. So the boss sometimes, he doesn't have the gift of being able to be silent long enough to hear something that would actually benefit him tremendously. So understanding that I want to spend X amount of time in the day quiet. Think about that. When you're having a conversation, think to yourself, if I had to give a number in this conversation, would I say I'm speaking 50% of the time? 80% of the time? How do I get that number down? Being cognizant of that in a broader sense will help us achieve it in the most magnificent way. May God bless us to have these fences that keep us at our most productive. Thank you so much for listening. Be'ezrat Hashem, looking forward to seeing you again at our next shiur. Alamak.